The Finance and Strategic Planning Committee meeting for Monday, January 22nd. Looking to Council for disclosure of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof. Seeing none. Can I get an approval of minutes for the November 20th FSP meeting? Mayor Jaworski, seconded by Councillor Freeman. All those in favor? Carried. Moving on to staff reports, we have from Tracy Bell a procurement award summary for the last quarter of 2017. Any questions on that, Council? Seeing none, thank you very much for the information and update. Next, we have the Uptown Community Improvement Plan, additional commercial building loan, commercial building improvement loans prepared by Sandy Little. I take it it's a report, and if there's any questions, staff are available for questions on what I assume we'd consider to be a good news story. Moved by Councillor Durrell, seconded by Councillor Burke. Questions, comments, seeing none. All those in favor? Carried. Well, let those folks keep on building. It's excellent to see businesses investing as we are in the Uptown for their success and our collective success. Next up, we have gas tax funding transfers report prepared by Kim Reger. Seems administrative, arising from the federal government eventually getting around to looking at some items. No presentation here. Any questions, Council, on this? Seeing none, I'll look for a mover and seconder. Moved by Councillor Durrell, seconded by Councillor Freeman. All those in favor? That's carried. That takes us to community car share report prepared by two members of staff. And we have a delegation. Staff, is anything before we hear from the delegation or just here for questions afterwards? Matthew, I turn the podium up to you, Matthew Piggott, Business Development and Member Services Manager for Community Car Share. Go ahead, sir.
Good afternoon, City of Waterloo councillors. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to this issue today, and as well thank you for support of car sharing over the last 20 years. I'm here to speak to you today in order to update you on the current status of community car share, the work we've done to find a path forward, and as well provide some feedback on the staff report that was submitted to council. As many of you know, we were founded in 1998 in Kitchener-Waterloo as Ontario's first car sharing company. The reason we started this is because our founders were forward-thinking and visionary, and because they thought that the region had the right mix of people and technology to make car sharing happen, and to do it before other cities had started their own. A lot has changed in the last 20 years, but we were successful in growing the business to several other Ontario cities, attracting over 2,000 members, operating a fleet of about 75 vehicles, and we currently employ 6 full-time staff. After 20 years, though, it is clear that it's time for a change. First of all, we need to acknowledge the internal challenges that we face. Although our costs have been reasonably maintained and well within industry norms, over the past decades, we haven't grown to be large enough or done so quickly enough in order to pay back the capital lent to us during our startup phase. That includes capital, of course, from the City of Waterloo. The car share industry is also rapidly changing and is currently moving into the mainstream in ways we could never have imagined 20 years ago. These changes also mean that operating as a nonprofit is not, in our opinion, a viable long-term solution. All this being said, we do believe that we have acted soon enough in order to ensure the long-term survival of the company and the service in Waterloo for many decades to come. I wanted to let you know about some of the work we've done to find a way forward. Our board and staff started this process over 15 months ago, and we extensively investigated every conceivable option, including continuing to exist in our current form. Out of this process, we came to the recommendation to sell Community Car Share's assets and debts to Communoto, a Quebec-based car sharing organization, and their Ontario-based subsidiary, which is Virtue Car. In terms of where we currently are in that process, in November, Communoto sent our members a letter of intent, which outlined how we would come to an agreement for sale. We asked our members twice to approve this direction, and both times they gave strong approval in public meetings that we held. Our board and Communoto then proceeded to negotiate a definitive agreement, which is a two-part approval process. Part one was completed just this past Friday, where our board signed the definitive agreement with Communoto, but there is a second part to that process, which is we now must seek written consent from all parties listed in the agreement so that the sale can conclude, with the hope that this will all be concluded by the end of February 2018. The City of Waterloo is obviously, as someone who has lent us money and who we have a parking agreement with, that is someone we need that's a group we need consent from in order to close the deal. Final thoughts. Why do we think Communoto is the best organization and company to take this forward? First, they actually started car sharing in North America, specifically in Quebec City in 1994. So we found someone who had been around longer than us. They're independently owned car sharing operator. They operate in 7 cities in Canada, from Kingston to Halifax, Montreal, and Quebec City between there. One of their first steps post completion of the sale will be to harmonize their rates with their existing Ontario company, which will actually result in lower fees for the City of the Waterloo as a corporate member, and as well to all of our members who are using the service, and the many more that we hope to attract afterwards. They've also agreed to assume all debts, keep staff employed, and allow all of our members to continue to use a car share and the many positive benefits that come from that. They ultimately have the goal of growing car sharing across Southern Ontario. These are all items that we want to see in a potential purchaser. With regards to the staff report, finally, I would say that overall, we are very supportive of the recommendations made with regards to the line of credit. And to make it perfectly clear, Communoto intends to pay back the loan by January 30th, 2018 deadline. And of course, continue to make interest payments, payments which Community Car Share has never missed in our history. Where we're not exactly in agreement is the decision to charge for paid parking once the deal is closed. First, just philosophically, we don't believe that solutions such as car sharing should be charged for parking, as this effectively amounts to a barrier to providing more service. Secondly, as we enter the period where we're about to close the sale, it is important that there is as few hurdles as possible, and having to switch to paid parking is one of them. As City of Waterloo staff have noted, should Community Car Share cease operations, it would be difficult or not impossible to repay the loan or to recoup any money from that. With that in mind, I would like to suggest to Council that you not adopt the staff recommendation with regards to parking. Instead, if possible, implement a transition period where the existing parking arrangement could be maintained, possibly until June 30th, 2018, when the loans are repaid. Thank you again for the opportunity to present. I look forward to any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Matthew. Any questions from Council? Mayor Jaworski.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks for the organization for what it's done for the citizens of Waterloo for the past 20 years, and getting the car share up and going, and having certainly providing a great service to many people in our community. Yeah. The quantum station concept, I saw that on your first page, and it reminded me. Does Communoto or Virtue Car have that type of concept where you have that car delivery service? And so will that change? And if it does change, how do you see that impacting users?
That's a really good question. The quantum program is something that we developed. It was very specific to our organization and the strengths and challenges that we have. It allowed us to deliver all across the city. Communoto has a really neat feature called large economies of scale, where they can simply roll out more cars than we could ever afford to do. Without tying them to anything, I would assume that is the path they will be going down. And to be honest, I think that would be more reliable service to people in all neighborhoods.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, Council? Seeing none, thank you very much. I turn to Council Mayor Jaworski.
I have a question of staff, please.
Go ahead.
So through the chair, just on the parking spots aspect, what we're recommending here is strictly the uptown spots, which are paid spots, are the ones that are issue. So if we have a car share spot at Rim Park and things like that, where the parking's free, that would still continue. We would still continue to offer that because it's a free spot anyway. I'm actually asking. I don't even know if there are spots at Rim Park, but or rec center and that.
Through you, Chair Henry. Yes, Mayor Jaworski, there are spaces allocated to the car share at several city facilities, including Rim Park, Moses Springer, Albert McCormick Community Center, and Waterloo Memorial Recreation Center complex.
And those don't become paid through this staff report that we're about to approve or consider?
At this time, there isn't a market rate set for those spaces at those locations, so no, there wouldn't be a rate charged for those.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, Council? I see movement from Councillor Durrell.
Yeah, I'm wondering what Council's appetite is for amending recommendation 5 and perhaps having something put in there to perhaps have it maybe go over a 5-year period of time or something along those lines, just to make it a little bit easier for this transition to happen for car share. How does, through you, Chair, I guess I'm asking, how does Council feel about perhaps an amendment in that space?
I'm in the hands of Council. Councillor Whaley.
Well, you know, parking in the core is at a premium. No one knows that better than you, Councillor Durrell. Even the mayor has to pay for parking, and I think that that fair market value is the way to go. There are sites, as was mentioned by Ms. Tutman, outside the core that are free, but I think the core area parking is such importance for our businesses, and we have, you know, obviously it's a taxable benefit for the mayor. So I think it should be as the recommendation should be as written.
Other thoughts and views in response to Councillor Durrell's question, Council? I would note as well that under separate cover, Council did receive confidential legal advice on this matter. Councillor Maven.
Through you, Chair Henry, to Councillor Durrell. 5 years seems like an awful long time. I see the advantages of having a phase out or phase in, if you will, but 3 years would be probably acceptable to me.
I think it seems incumbent on us to get perhaps the motion as printed on the floor, given there's at least appetite for the existing motion, and maybe people can deal with potential thoughts on that once we get on the floor. Moved by Councillor Whaley, seconded by Mayor Jaworski. And I'm in the hands of Council for whether people would prefer trying to amend it or just voting on this and having that voting on the first 4 and separating out the 5th, or however we'd like to do it. Mayor Jaworski.
Well, since I moved or seconded, I'd like to speak to it. I think the key thing is to look at how far away places like the rec center is. Right, the rec center, we can offer parking that's more readily available. We have the opportunity provided probably we'll provide it at cost, which is a cost free. It's not a paid parking system there yet, and I think that's you know, certainly proximate to Uptown. And if the vendor, the for-profit entity, decides, you know what, they really want to have spaces in the Uptown, that would be something that we would consider, I think, through our permit system or whatever Ms. Tetman comes up with. But I think there's opportunity for them. We're not precluding them from the Uptown. It's on a fair market value basis.
Other comments, Council?
Thank you, Councillor Henry. The email that came in did not get read by myself, so I appreciate that our solicitor sent us some information. That said, I'm still, I mean, I think for me, community car share is providing a service, especially as we're intensifying in the core, that while I appreciate that free parking is in a lot of our amenities outside of the core, this is, I think, a very important place for it to be. So I'm wondering if, and I guess this has been moved and seconded, I would be interested in looking at some, I know we give BIA members a negotiated price, a less price, so maybe that could be something that we would look at because they are a business in the core. So maybe that's something we can do, and that's not something I suppose that has to. So I guess what I'd be asking for is a friendly amendment to take out fair market value, and just to make parking permits available at reduced or BIA prices, as I'm amending on the fly. I know the clerk loves that.
Any commentary from staff on these matters that council should consider before I keep going around the horn?
And if I can just explain, what I'm concerned about is that this new company would see that the expense would be too high because it's well over $100 for a parking permit in Uptown, and that they would remove the cars from the core. And then where are we at? So I'm just trying to play this out so that, is there some way that we could put something in this resolution that there is negotiation, because we believe that this is an important service that's being offered to people who live and work in the core. So there's that sort of stopgap, and I don't know what that looks like, but.
Through you, Chair
Christine?
Henry. So the city currently, in conjunction with the Uptown Waterloo Business Improvement Area, offers 2 discounted parking programs. The first parking program is our Park and Stride program, which is made available in the Bower lot, which is right across the street from Waterloo Memorial Recreation Complex. And we offer that parking at a discount for people who are willing to park further outside the core and then walk into the core. So at this point in time, the community car share already has a parking space at the rec center, so that kind of fulfills that component. The second discounted option that we offer is the token program in the Uptown Waterloo Business Improvement, in the Uptown Waterloo Parkade. And that program is kind of designed for people who work in the Uptown core but aren't here on a consistent basis. The way the pricing of that program works, it would be in the car share's best interests financially to purchase a permit in a surface parking lot, for example, the Caroline North lot. It would be better financially for them to do that than to pursue the pricing of the token program.
So I trust that's helpful information. Any other comments? I saw Councillor Whaley's hand, but I see it withdrawn. I can either take the resolution as a whole, or I can take the first 4 and the 5th separately. Is there a preference to take the 5th separately? That's what I thought. So it's been moved and seconded. First 4 recommendations. All those in favor? Carried. 5th recommendation as printed. Any further commentary? I should see none because we didn't have any. Okay, so all those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Durrell, Councillor Maven. Thank you very much. No, useful discussion and good information. Matthew, good luck on the concluding aspects of this by the end of February. I trust we will have a long-term partner to continue to provide important services in this community. And in any event, as we look beyond June 30th, 2019, another, contract may need to be negotiated anyways, depending on the status of the line of credit. So there's always more opportunities to continue the dialogue. So thank you very much. Next up, and kind of last up, Council, we have a multi-page set of recommendations coming from the annual reserve and reserve funds update, prepared by Julie Kobesar, and there's a presentation as well. Julie, whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Before I begin my presentation, I just wanted to point out that on Appendix A, there is a correction that is needed. I'm not sure which page that is in your package. It is Appendix A. Currently under the revenues section, it is reading on the third down 65%, and that should be reading 75%. So I just wanted to clarify that before beginning my presentation. In December, Council received the consultant's report on the development of the long-term financial planning tool. It's the initial consultant's report, and within that, the consultants made a number of recommendations around reserve consolidation. Staff have reviewed these recommendations, and we're bringing forth staff recommendations through the Reserve and Reserve Fund report that you have before you today. In addition to the consolidation aspect to the report, there are a number of housekeeping updates to individual reserve and reserve fund policies as well. Reserve and reserve funds are often thought of as rainy day funds. But the use of our reserves and reserve funds is really much more varied than that. Reserves are not only rainy day funds, and we want to move away from that line of thought. So if they're not rainy day funds, then what are reserves? Well, reserves and reserve funds are tools. Tools that we use to perform a number of jobs throughout the city. Some of the things that our reserves and reserves funds do is to provide for the replacement and the rehabilitation of our existing city assets, to provide for new assets, to provide for future liabilities, to provide the flexibility to manage our debt levels, to provide contingency funding for one-time or unforeseeable events, to provide tax stability, to contribute to the provision of services for our citizens. And if you move to that line of thinking, then the question really becomes, does the city have the right tools to do what we need to do going into the future? So let's look in our toolbox. The city currently has 49 reserves, and within those 49 reserves and reserve funds, there are 26 sub-reserves and 39 separate policies that prescribe the use of these funds. Each fund has a minimum or a target or a maximum. Some have a combination of these. And these levels have been established and adjusted over time. Many of our reserves have been around for decades. Historically, when a need was identified, a new reserve was established to isolate funds to address that need. So the result is that we have a lot of specific tools for specific jobs. What the long-term financial planning consultants have recommended and what staff is recommending before